This is the story of 7 luxury menswear brands, the names behind the suits and tailored jackets hanging in your wardrobe at $5,000 apiece, that sell themselves as rivals, and the shared factory floors where their garments are cut, stitched, and finished by the same hands. The labels are different. The building, far more often than the industry will ever admit, is the same. Walk into any high-end department store and look at the wall of menswear. Armani, Zegna, Gucci, Prada. 4, 5, 6 names hung side by side, each with its own logo, its own typeface, its own carefully built mythology. One whispers old money restraint, one shouts power, another sells you heritage, and the next one sells you rebellion, and every single one of them is asking you to believe that the price gap between them reflects a real difference in where and how the suits and jackets and trousers are actually made. That belief is the product, and it's the one thing the luxury industry cannot afford for you to examine too closely. Here's what the wall of labels doesn't tell you. Modern Italian luxury runs on a system called contract manufacturing. A brand designs a garment, a suit, a coat, a pair of trousers, sets a price, and then hands the actual production to an outside workshop. That workshop often hands part of the job to a smaller one, and that one hands it down again. The industry calls these suppliers fake-in workshops. The clothes get the label sewn in at the very end, almost as an afterthought, and then they travel to a boutique where the markup begins. The label is the last thing added, and it's the most expensive thing you pay for. For years, this was an open secret, whispered about by tailors and denied by everyone with a marketing budget. Then Italian prosecutors started opening the buildings. The man at the center of it is a Milan prosecutor named Paolo Storari. His investigation did not begin in a glamorous atelier. It began in 2023 in a Chinese-run workshop in Trezzano sul Naviglio on the edge of Milan, where a 26-year-old Bangladeshi worker died. According to investigators, it was his alleged first day on the job, and his employers tried to register him with Social Security only after the fatal accident. Pull that thread, and the whole garment starts to unravel. By March of 2024, the Milan tribunal had placed a series of names under judicial administration, not unknown sweatshops, names you know. Giorgio Armani Operations, Manufacture Dior, Valentino Bags Lab, and Loro Piana, the cashmere house owned by LVMH, the world's largest luxury conglomerate and the most valuable luxury group on earth. The court was careful with its language. These companies were not formally accused of running the workshops themselves. They were deemed to have negligently facilitated the exploitation by failing to look at what was happening 1 or 2 or 3 steps down their own supply chains. Loro Piana was placed under court administration in July of 2025. It cut ties with the supplier and said it was cooperating fully. Now hold that picture in your mind, because this is where the rivalry starts to dissolve. In November 2025, Italian Carabinieri inspected 3 workshops in Tuscany, in the heart of Italy's suit-making and leather goods region, that were producing for Tod's, the house famous for its loafers. Inside those buildings, investigators documented up to 7 separate levels of subcontracting stacked on top of each other. And when they cataloged what was physically present in those rooms, they did not find a single brand. They seized goods carrying the names Zegna, Saint Laurent, Prada, Cuoieria Fiorentina, and Mad Bag. Different labels, supposedly different worlds. 1 floor. This is the part the wall of logos is designed to hide. The brands that compete for your money in the boutique are, at the level of the actual hands doing the actual work, frequently neighbors. And sometimes they are not even neighbors. Sometimes they are the same room. There's a single detail in the case files that says everything. One worker described the workshop where he was employed assembling belts. Not for one brand. The belts he handled, according to his testimony, carried the names Zara, Diesel, Hugo Boss Orange, Trussardi, Versace, Tommy Hilfiger, Gucci, Gianfranco Ferré, and Dolce Gabbana. Read that list again slowly. A mass-market high-street label and a fistful of names that consider themselves luxury, all moving through one set of hands, in one building, on one production line. The man fastening a buckle for a €30 Zara belt was, by the same testimony, fastening a buckle for a brand that would price its version at 10 times that, and call it heritage. By December of 2025, Storari's probe had expanded to 13 luxury fashion companies, all asked to produce documents: Dolce and Gabbana, Versace, Prada, Gucci, Saint Laurent's manufacturing arm, Ferragamo, Givenchy, Alexander McQueen, Missoni, and several more. These were requests for information rather than formal charges, but the sheer breadth tells you something the brands would never say in an advertisement. This wasn't a story about one bad supplier. The prosecutors were describing a structure. So what does that structure actually cost? And who pays for it? The court documents put hard numbers on the markup, and the numbers are difficult to read with a straight face. Investigators described luxury goods, suits, jackets, accessories, produced for a few dozen euros and sold at retail for several thousand. In some cases, the documents cite markups reaching 10,000%. 10,000. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the chain, the people doing the work, the tailoring, the stitching, the finishing, were allegedly paid as little as €2.75 an hour. In the Todd's case, working hours that ran past the legal limit, sleeping in what prosecutors called degrading conditions inside the very buildings where the goods were made. That's the engine. A suit is made cheaply by someone working in conditions the law does not allow, in a building shared with other famous names, and then a label is sewn in that multiplies the price by a factor most industries would be too embarrassed to attempt. The rivalry you see on the shop floor is the marketing layer. The shared floor underneath it is the manufacturing reality. And if the shared subcontractors weren't enough to collapse the illusion, look one level higher at who actually owns these so-called competitors. Take Tom Ford and Zegna. To a shopper, these are two distinct points on the luxury map. Tom Ford is sleek, modern, Hollywood. Zegna is Italian heritage and quiet tailoring. Wool suits cut in Biella, the textile district in Piedmont that has been weaving fine cloth for generations. Pick one over the other and you feel like you've expressed a preference, a taste, an allegiance. Here's the problem with that feeling. The Ermenegildo Zegna Group, founded in Trevero in 1910 and now listed on the New York Stock Exchange, owns the Zegna brand. It also owns Thom Browne, the American designer label, which it bought in a deal that valued the company at around $500 million. And since 2023, it operates Tom Ford's entire fashion business under a long-term license after buying out the part of Tom Ford International it didn't already own. 3 names, 3 personalities, 3 price points on suits that might share the same Biella wool and the same subcontracted stitching. 1 Italian group sitting behind all of them, and in many cases, 1 set of Zegna mills weaving the very fabric that ends up in all 3. When you choose Tom Ford over Zegna to make a statement about who you are, the company collecting your money doesn't particularly care which logo you preferred. It owns both stories. It wrote both stories. This is the quiet genius of the modern luxury structure, and it's worth saying plainly. The industry has separated the 2 things you assume go together. It has separated the brand from the maker. The brand is a piece of intellectual property, a font and a heritage tale and a boutique with good lighting. The maker is a contract workshop in Tuscany or on the edge of Milan that might be stitching suits for 5 other brands that same week. The whole architecture is built so that you fall in love with the first thing and never think about the second. The Italian government understands exactly how much is at stake here, which is why its response has been less about the workers and more about the reputation. The Minister of Made in Italy, Adolfo Urso, declared a state of emergency for the sector and said the reputation of Made in Italy was under attack. Notice the framing. The attack, in the government's telling, is not the exploitation. The attack is the exposure of it. The thing that needs defending is the label. The people who have studied this longest see it differently. Deborah Lucchetti, who coordinates the Clean Clothes campaign in Italy, called worker exploitation a structural phenomenon within the sector, not an accident. Not a few rotten suppliers, but a feature of how the math is allowed to work. Campaigners point out that the brands themselves often set the price they pay their contractors so low that those contractors are effectively pushed to subcontract again and again, down to a level where no one is really watching anyone. The system does not exploit people despite the luxury pricing. In a sense, the luxury pricing depends on it. The prosecutor's strategy reflects that. Storari's approach has been to treat the commissioning brand as responsible too, not just the workshop that got caught. Under Italian law, a company can be held accountable for offenses committed by suppliers acting in its interest. In the Todd's case, prosecutors went further than negligence and alleged what one called intentional blindness, pointing out that the company had commissioned audits of these workshops, received the findings, and then failed to fix the problems those findings revealed. They sought a 6-month ban on the company's advertising. Think about what that punishment targets. Not the factory, the marketing. The state went after the one thing the brand values most, which tells you the state knows exactly where the value really lives. So go back to that wall of labels in the department store because by now it should look different. The names are still there, hung at their careful distances, each insisting it is nothing like the one beside it. But you now know that the distance between them, between a suit with one label and a suit with another, is often a few feet of factory floor, or a few lines on a subcontracting ledger, or a single corporate parent collecting from all of them at once. You know that the most expensive component of the garment in your hands may be the label, and that the label was the last thing added, sewn in long after the real work was done by someone you will never see, in a building that may have been finishing a rival's order that same afternoon. The 7 rivals were never really 7. The factory was, far more often than anyone wants to admit, 1. And the next time a salesperson tells you that this house is different, that this one truly makes its own, whether it is a suit, a jacket, or a coat with a price tag that requires a conversation, ask the one question the whole industry is built to keep you from asking. Not who designed it, not whose name is on it, just this: whose hands and in whose building.